There is a moment in every conversation where everything either comes together or falls apart. You know that moment. It is the pause before someone speaks, the silence after a sentence lands wrong, the look on a face that tells you the words did not reach where they were supposed to go. Communication is not simply about talking, it is about reaching another human being, truly reaching them, across all the noise and distraction and assumption that fills the space between two people. And the truth is, most of us were never taught how to do it well. We learned to walk, we learned to read, we learned mathematics and history and how to manage our time. But somewhere in all of that learning, the art of genuine human connection was left out of the curriculum. We were expected to pick it up along the way, by watching others, by trial and error, by surviving misunderstandings and recovering from arguments that should never have happened. And so here we are, adults navigating relationships and careers and communities, carrying communication habits that were shaped more by accident than by intention. This book is here to change that. What you are about to read is not a collection of tricks or clever phrases designed to manipulate people into liking you. This is something deeper and more lasting than that. These are 11 principles drawn from decades of research in psychology, linguistics, neuroscience, and human behavior, brought together in a way that is honest, practical, and built for real life. Whether you are a professional trying to lead a team, a parent trying to connect with your children, a partner trying to be truly understood, or simply a person who wants to move through the world with more clarity and less friction, these pages were written with you in mind. Each tip builds upon the last. By the time you reach the end, you will not just know these principles intellectually, you will feel them. You will understand why people shut down, why conversations go sideways, why some people seem effortlessly magnetic while others struggle to be heard. And more importantly, you will know exactly what to do about it. So let us begin. Not with a lecture, not with a list of do's and don'ts, but with an honest look at what communication really is and why it matters more today than it ever has before. We live in a world that is more connected than at any point in human history. We can send a message to someone on the other side of the planet in under a second. We can broadcast our thoughts to thousands of people with a single tap on a screen. We have more ways to communicate than any generation before us, and yet, study after study tells us the same uncomfortable truth. People are lonelier, more misunderstood, and more disconnected than ever. How is that possible? The answer lies in the difference between communication and connection. We are transmitting more than ever, but we are connecting less. We are sending words, but we are not sending meaning. We are speaking, but we are not being heard. And in that gap, in that vast and growing space between what we say and what actually lands, relationships break down, opportunities dissolve, and potential goes unrealized. Good communication is not a luxury. It is the foundation of everything that matters. Careers are built or broken on it. Marriages survive or crumble because of it. Leaders rise or fall depending on their ability to make people feel heard, understood, and valued. Children grow into confident, emotionally healthy adults when someone communicates with them well. And people who feel genuinely understood tend to be healthier, happier, and more resilient than those who do not. This is why the 11 tips in this book are not optional extras for people who want to be better at small talk. They are essential tools for living a full and meaningful life. They are the building blocks of every great relationship, every successful team, every community that actually holds together. And they are available to every single one of you, regardless of where you started, what your background is, or how many years you have spent communicating in ways that did not quite work. The journey starts here. Tip 1. Listen to understand, not to reply. There is a habit so common that most people do not even notice they are doing it. Someone is speaking to you, sharing something important, pouring words into the space between you, and while they are talking, you are already composing your response. You are thinking about what you want to say next, how to make your point, how to correct something they got wrong, or how to relate their experience back to something that happened to you. You are present in body, but absent in attention. You are hearing, but you are not listening. This is the single most common communication failure in the world, and it is also the most damaging. Because when people sense that you are not truly listening, they stop telling you the things that matter. They give you the surface version of the story, the edited, polished, safe version, and they keep the real stuff hidden. Not because they do not want to share it, but because they have learned, consciously or not, that you are not actually receiving it. True listening is one of the rarest and most powerful gifts one human being can give another. It requires something that modern life is not especially good at cultivating. It requires the willingness to be still. Now let us be precise about what listening to understand actually means, because this is not just about staying quiet while someone else talks. You can be silent and still not be listening. You can nod along without absorbing a single word. Real listening is an active, engaged, fully present experience. It is the practice of receiving another person completely, without the filter of your own agenda, without the urgency to fix or judge or redirect. It is being with them in their words, following the current of their thoughts, noticing not just what they say, but how they say it. Consider for a moment the difference between these two experiences. In the first, you are telling someone about a difficult situation you are facing at work. As you speak, you can see their eyes moving slightly, not looking away, but not quite locked in either. Their head is nodding at intervals that feel automatic rather than responsive. And when you finish, they say something that is technically related to what you said, but somehow misses the emotional center of it entirely. They have responded to the facts, but not the feeling. You walk away feeling vaguely empty, like you did not quite get what you came for. In the second experience, you are telling that same story to someone else. As you speak, their attention is completely on you. You can feel it, the way you feel warmth from a fire. Their expressions shift with yours. They lean in at the difficult parts. They let silence exist when you need a moment. And when they finally speak, it is not to fix your problem or share their own similar story. It is to reflect back what they actually heard, including the emotional weight underneath the words. You feel seen. You feel understood. You feel, without being able to fully explain why, lighter. The difference between those two experiences is not about intelligence. It is not about vocabulary or wit or education. It is purely about the quality of listening. And the second person made you feel something that most people spend their entire lives searching for. They made you feel that you matter. So how do you become that second person? It starts with a decision, and the decision is this. When someone is speaking to you, your only job in that moment is to understand them, not to prepare your next point, not to evaluate whether they are right or wrong, not to manage how the conversation reflects on you, just to understand them. This sounds simple. It is not. Because your brain is fast, much faster than speech, and it is always looking for something to do with the spare processing capacity. It will wander to your to-do list, to a concern about later tonight, to a memory that the speaker's words triggered. This is normal. The practice of listening is the practice of repeatedly bringing your attention back, gently, without judgment, to the person in front of you. One of the most useful tools for deepening your listening is what researchers call reflective listening. After someone shares something meaningful with you, rather than immediately responding with your own thoughts, you reflect back what you heard. Not a word-for-word repetition, that would feel strange and robotic, but a genuine attempt to articulate the essence of what they shared, including the emotional dimension. Something like, "It sounds like you are feeling overwhelmed and a little unappreciated. Is that right?" Or, "What I am hearing is that you care deeply about this, but you are not sure anyone else does." When you do this well, something remarkable happens. The person either confirms that you understood them, which creates a moment of deep connection, or they gently correct you, which gives them the opportunity to clarify their own thoughts and feelings. Either way, the conversation moves to a level of depth and meaning that it simply cannot reach when both parties are just waiting for their turn to talk. There is another dimension to listening that is easy to miss. It is the listening that happens between the words. People rarely say exactly what they mean, especially when what they mean is emotionally charged. They approach the truth sideways. They hint at it. They circle around it. They embed it in metaphor or humor or an offhand comment that they will later dismiss as nothing. A skilled listener hears those things. A skilled listener notices when someone says everything is fine in a tone that suggests the opposite, and knows how to create enough safety and space for the real story to emerge. This kind of listening requires what we might call emotional attunement. It is the ability to track not just the content of what someone is saying, but the emotional landscape underneath it. And while some people seem naturally gifted at this, it is absolutely a skill that can be learned and developed with practice and intention. Here is a practice you can begin today. In your next 3 conversations of any real substance, set a clear intention before the conversation begins. The intention is simply this: I am here to understand. Every time you notice your mind composing a response while the other person is still speaking, note it without judgment and return your attention to them. Notice how the quality of the conversation shifts. Notice how the other person responds to being fully received. And notice how it feels to be truly present with another human being. Without agenda, without defense. That feeling is where great communication begins. Tip 2. Speak with clarity and intention. If listening is the receiving end of communication, speaking is the giving end. And just as most people have never been taught how to truly listen, most people have also never been taught how to speak in a way that actually delivers what they intend. We put words into the air and assume that the meaning travels with them. But meaning is not contained in words. Meaning is constructed by the listener, shaped by their history, their assumptions, their emotional state, and dozens of other factors that have nothing to do with what the speaker intended. This is why clarity is not just about using simple words. It is about understanding that communication is a 2-part process, and that your responsibility as the speaker does not end when the words leave your mouth. It ends when the meaning lands. Let us start with intention, because before you can speak with clarity, you need to know what you actually want to say. This sounds obvious, and yet a staggering amount of human communication is muddled from the very beginning because the speaker themselves is not quite sure what they mean. They have a feeling, an impulse, a vague sense of something that needs to be said, and they start talking and hope that the words will organize the thought as they go. Sometimes this works. More often, it produces long, winding, confusing sentences that leave the listener unsure of where they ended up or what they were supposed to take from the journey. Before you speak, especially about anything that matters, take a moment to ask yourself one question. What do I actually want this person to understand, feel, or do as a result of what I'm about to say? This question is a lens that immediately cuts through the noise. It forces you to identify the core of your message before you attempt to wrap it in words. And when you know what your core message is, your language becomes sharper, your sentences become shorter, and your listener follows you with far less effort. Clarity in speaking also requires the courage to be direct. There is a cultural habit in many parts of the world of circling around the point, of hinting at what you mean rather than saying it plainly, of softening a message so aggressively that the message itself gets lost. Some of this comes from kindness. Some of it comes from a desire to avoid conflict. And some of it comes from a fear of being rejected, judged, or wrong. Whatever the source, the result is the same. The person you are speaking to has to do an enormous amount of guesswork, and they will often guess incorrectly. Being direct does not mean being blunt or unkind. You can be both direct and gentle. You can say difficult things with warmth. But directness means having enough respect for the other person and enough confidence in yourself to say what you mean without burying it in so many qualifications and softeners that it becomes unrecognizable. There is a principle in communication sometimes described as bottom line up front. It comes originally from military and professional settings where time is short and precision is critical. But it applies with equal force to everyday conversation. Rather than building up to your main point through layers of context and preamble, you state the main point first and then provide the supporting detail. This does 2 things immediately. It orients the listener so they know what framework to put the information you are about to share into, and it respects their time and attention by not making them work hard to figure out where you are going. Contrast these 2 approaches. In the first, You spend several minutes describing the background of a problem, the various things you tried, the people you consulted, the challenges you encountered, the frustrations you felt. And finally, at the end, you reveal that what you actually need is a specific kind of help with a specific task. By that point, the listener may have already started making assumptions about where you were going, and those assumptions might have led them in entirely the wrong direction. In the second approach, you begin with, "I need your help with one specific thing," and then provide exactly as much context as necessary to enable that help. The listener knows from the very first sentence what kind of attention to bring. They are oriented. They are ready. And the entire conversation becomes more efficient and more satisfying for both of you. Another crucial aspect of clarity is the avoidance of jargon and abstraction when speaking to people who do not share your specialized vocabulary. Every professional field, every social circle, every organization develops its own language, its own shorthand, its own set of terms that carry enormous amounts of meaning for insiders, but are essentially opaque to anyone else. When you use that language with people who are outside the circle, you do not just fail to communicate. You actively exclude them. You make them feel less intelligent than they are, and you create a distance that can take considerable effort to close. The most skilled communicators are those who can translate complex ideas into language that any thoughtful person can understand without losing the essence or oversimplifying in ways that distort the truth. This is an art, and it takes practice. It requires you to think about your audience constantly, to ask yourself what they already know, what they do not know, and what the simplest and most accurate path is from where they are to where you want them to be. Words matter. They matter more than most people give them credit for in everyday conversation. The specific words you choose carry connotations beyond their dictionary definitions. They trigger emotional responses. They suggest values and attitudes. They signal respect or disrespect, inclusion or exclusion, warmth or coldness. Choosing your words carefully is not pedantry. It is a form of care. One of the most powerful things you can do for the clarity of your communication is to develop the habit of checking for understanding. Rather than assuming that because you said something clearly, it was received clearly, you create space for the listener to reflect back what they heard. This is not about testing them or being condescending. It is about genuinely wanting to confirm that the meaning you intended is the meaning that landed. A simple phrase like, "Does that make sense to you?" Or "I want to make sure I explained that well. Does it track?" can open a conversation that resolves misunderstandings before they have a chance to grow. Speak with intention. Speak with clarity. Know what you want to say before you say it. Say it directly. And stay present long enough to ensure that it was received the way you meant it. These are not complicated steps, but they require a level of mindfulness about your own communication that most people have never been asked to develop. Start developing it now. Tip 3. Master the language of your body. You've been speaking two languages your entire life. One of them you learned consciously, word by word, grammar rule by grammar rule. The other you absorbed without knowing it, from the moment you were born, by watching faces, reading postures, and interpreting the thousand small signals that bodies make in the presence of other bodies. That second language is body language, and it is far more powerful than most people realize. Research in the field of nonverbal communication has consistently shown that when verbal and nonverbal messages conflict, people believe the nonverbal. If you say the words "I am happy to help" while your arms are crossed, your jaw is tight, and your eyes are drifting toward the door, the person you are speaking to will not believe you are happy to help. They will believe your body. And they will be right to do so because the body is harder to control than words, and therefore more honest. This creates both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge is that if your inner state is not aligned with your message, your body will often betray you. The opportunity is that by developing awareness of your nonverbal communication, you can begin to align them, and that alignment is one of the most powerful things you can do for your credibility, your presence, and your ability to connect. Let us begin with the most obvious and perhaps most studied element of body language: eye contact. The eyes are sometimes called the windows to the soul, and while that might sound like a cliché, the research behind it is substantial. Eye contact regulates the flow of communication. It signals attention, interest, and respect. When you look at someone while they are speaking, you are telling them wordlessly that they have your full attention, that what they are saying matters, and that you are present with them. When you look away frequently, check your phone, or let your gaze wander to other things in the room, you communicate the opposite. The key with eye contact is balance. Sustained, unblinking eye contact for extended periods becomes uncomfortable and can feel aggressive or intrusive. The natural rhythm of conversation involves eye contact that is present and engaged but moves naturally, breaking gently and returning. A general guideline is to maintain eye contact for about 2/3 to 3/4 of the time in most conversations. But to follow your instincts and the social norms of the culture you are in, since these vary considerably around the world. Posture is another major element of the body's communication. How you hold your body sends constant signals about your confidence, your openness, and your level of engagement. Open posture, meaning an uncrossed, unfolded body that faces the person you are speaking with, signals availability, honesty, and receptivity. Closed posture, crossed arms, turned away body, hunched shoulders, signals the opposite, often protection, discomfort, or disengagement. This does not mean you should never cross your arms. Sometimes people cross their arms because they are cold, or simply because it is a comfortable resting position. But if you notice that you habitually take closed positions when certain people or topics arise, that is worth paying attention to. The body often expresses what the conscious mind has not yet acknowledged. Leaning in is one of the simplest and most powerful nonverbal signals of engagement and interest. When you lean slightly towards someone who is speaking, you are physically demonstrating that you want to close the gap between you, that you are drawn in by what they are saying. It is a gesture of warmth and attentiveness that most people register and respond to positively, even when they are not consciously aware of it. The face is, of course, the richest source of nonverbal communication. The human face is capable of producing thousands of distinct expressions, and we are wired from birth to read them with remarkable precision. Smiling, the genuine kind that reaches the eyes rather than just the mouth, creates an immediate and powerful sense of warmth and approachability. It lowers defenses, invites openness, and signals that the interaction is safe. But forced or performative smiling, the kind that does not match the emotional content of the conversation, is often detectable and can actually undermine trust. Mirroring is a fascinating phenomenon in nonverbal communication that happens naturally between people who are in rapport with each other. When two people are genuinely connected in a conversation, their bodies tend to unconsciously synchronize. They adopt similar postures, mirror each other's gestures, breathe at similar rates. You have probably experienced this without naming it. The conversation that felt effortless, where you and the other person were leaning the same way, laughing at the same moments, and seemed to be operating on the same frequency. That was mirroring. Skilled communicators learn to use gentle, deliberate mirroring as a way of building rapport, being careful not to be so obvious about it that it feels like imitation or mockery. The goal is synchrony, a sense of being in the same space, moving in the same rhythm, which creates the felt sense of being understood and connected. Your voice, while technically verbal, has enormous nonverbal dimensions. The pace, pitch, volume, and tone of your voice carry as much meaning as the words themselves. Speaking too quickly can signal anxiety or overwhelm the listener. Speaking too slowly can signal uncertainty or lose the listener's attention. A monotone delivery drains energy from even the most interesting content. Variation in pitch, pace, and volume is what makes speech come alive. It is what signals which parts of what you are saying are most important, what creates emphasis and interest, and what keeps the listener engaged rather than allowing their attention to drift. Breath is the foundation of vocal presence. People who speak from a shallow, chest-level breath tend to sound tight, thin, and anxious. People who speak from a deeper belly-level breath tend to sound grounded, confident, and resonant. If you have ever been told to speak more confidently and found that instruction completely unhelpful, here is something more concrete. Before you speak in any high-stakes situation, take a slow, deep breath that expands your belly rather than just your chest. Feel yourself settle. Then speak from that settled place. The difference is often immediate and dramatic. Developing mastery over your nonverbal communication is a lifelong practice. It is not about performing a set of gestures that you read in a book. It is about developing a deeper alignment between what you feel and what you express, so that your words and your body tell the same story. When they do, something powerful happens. People feel it. They feel your presence, your authenticity, your engagement, and they respond in kind. Tip 4. Build the bridge of empathy. Of all the elements that make communication great, empathy may be the most misunderstood. Many people think empathy means feeling sorry for someone, or sharing their pain, or being emotionally overwhelmed by the suffering of others. But that is sympathy, and while sympathy has its place, it is quite different from empathy and far less useful as a communication tool. Empathy, in its truest form, is the ability to step into another person's experience and understand it from the inside. Not to judge it, not to fix it, not to compare it to your own experience, but to genuinely inhabit it long enough to understand what it is like to be them in this moment. It is an act of imaginative generosity, and it is one of the most transformative things you can bring to any conversation. The distinction between sympathy and empathy is captured beautifully in a simple contrast. Sympathy looks at someone in a hole and says, "That looks terrible. I am sorry you are down there." Empathy climbs down into the hole and says, "I see you. I am here with you. You are not alone." One of the most important things empathy does in communication is to create psychological safety. When people feel that you genuinely understand their perspective, even if you do not share it, even if you disagree with it, they feel safe. And when people feel safe, they open up. They tell you the truth. They share the things that matter. They become capable of hearing things that might otherwise make them defensive. Conversely, when empathy is absent, people feel judged, dismissed, or reduced to a problem to be solved. And when people feel that way, they shut down. They tell you what they think you want to hear. They protect themselves. And the communication that follows, however technically correct it might be, fails to create any real connection or movement. So how do you actually practice empathy in conversation? The first step is to consciously set aside your own frame of reference for the duration of the exchange. Your frame of reference is made up of your own experiences, your own values, your own emotional history, your own interpretations of how the world works. It is the lens through which you see everything, and it is very difficult to see past it. But empathy requires the attempt. It requires you to ask, before interpreting or responding, how might this situation look and feel from their position, given what I know about who they are and what they are going through? This is harder than it sounds, because we naturally and automatically filter everything through our own experience. When someone tells us about a problem, we immediately begin thinking about whether we have had a similar problem, what we did about it, and what we therefore think they should do. This is natural, but it is the opposite of empathy. Empathy stays with their experience rather than migrating back to yours. The second step is to validate the other person's emotional reality. Validation does not mean agreement. It means acknowledging that given who they are and the experiences they have had, it makes sense that they would feel the way they feel. It is saying, "I understand why you feel that way," rather than, "I think you are right to feel that way." The distinction is subtle but profound. Validation honors their experience without requiring you to abandon your own judgment. Many people resist validation because they worry that it amounts to endorsing something they do not agree with. But this is a misunderstanding. You can validate someone's anger without agreeing that the situation warranted anger. You can validate someone's fear without agreeing that the thing they fear is genuinely dangerous. What you are validating is their humanity, their right to feel what they feel, and their reality as a whole person rather than just a position to be argued with. The third step is to be genuinely curious about the other person's inner world. Empathy is not a performance. It is not a technique that you apply strategically to get a desired outcome. Real empathy flows from genuine interest in the people you are communicating with. What is it like to be them? What do they care about? What are they afraid of? What are they hoping for? What has brought them to this moment in this way? When you approach people with this kind of curiosity, they feel it. It is palpable. And it creates a quality of attention that most people experience so rarely that they respond to it with something close to relief. Empathy also requires the willingness to sit with discomfort. Sometimes the most empathic response to something someone shares is simply to be present with them in it, without trying to make it better, solve it, or shift the mood. We are often uncomfortable with other people's pain or distress, and our discomfort drives us to do something, to offer advice, to reframe the situation more positively, to introduce a silver lining. But sometimes what a person needs is not a silver lining. Sometimes they need someone who is willing to sit in the darkness with them for a moment, without rushing for the light switch. This is a profound act of courage and compassion. It says, "Your experience is real and I am not afraid of it. I can be with you here, fully, without needing you to be anywhere other than where you are." Empathy does not require that you have had the same experience as the other person. In fact, one of the great errors in attempting empathy is the assumption that because you went through something similar, you know what they are going through. Every person's experience is unique. The details that matter most are often invisible. The meanings they have assigned, the history they are carrying, the specific shape of their fear or grief or joy, none of that is accessible to you unless you ask and listen. This is where empathy and curiosity become inseparable. Ask, then listen. Not to compare, not to advise, but to understand. Ask questions like, "What is that like for you?" Or "What is the hardest part of this for you right now?" Or "How long have you been carrying this?" And then receive what they tell you, fully and without rushing to respond. When you build a bridge of empathy into every significant conversation you have, something begins to shift in all of your relationships. People trust you more. They open up more. They are more willing to hear difficult things from you because they know you are not judging them. They become more honest with you, and in turn, you become more honest with them. The quality of connection deepens, and the quality of communication deepens with it. Empathy is not weakness. It is not sentimentality. It is one of the most powerful and sophisticated communication tools available to any human being, and developing it is one of the greatest investments you can make in every relationship in your life. Tip 5. Ask questions that open doors. There are two kinds of questions. There are questions that close things down, and there are questions that open things up. Most people, most of the time, ask closing questions without realizing it, and in doing so, they cut off the very conversations they are hoping to have. A closing question is one that can be answered with a single word or a short phrase. Did you have a good day? Yes. Are you okay? Fine. Did the meeting go well? Sure. These questions are not wrong exactly, but they are invitations to the surface rather than to depth. They signal, perhaps without intending to, that a brief response is perfectly acceptable. And the person being asked, unless they are unusually forthcoming, will often take that cue and respond accordingly. An opening question, by contrast, requires a more expansive response. It invites the other person to think, to reflect, to share something of substance. What was the best part of your day? What has been on your mind lately? What do you think is really going on in that situation? How are you feeling about everything that is happening? These questions point the conversation inward and forward. They create space for real answers. They signal that you are genuinely interested and that you have time and attention to offer. The most powerful category of opening questions is what professionals in therapy, coaching, and negotiation call open-ended questions. These are questions that begin with words like what, how, why, tell me, describe for me. They cannot be answered with yes or no. They require the respondent to generate their own content, which means they reveal far more about the person's actual thoughts, feelings, and perspectives than a closed question ever could. But the power of a question goes beyond its structure. It also lies in the intent behind it. A question asked from genuine curiosity feels entirely different from a question asked as a technique, and people can tell the difference. When you ask someone a question because you truly want to know the answer, your tone, your body language, your subsequent listening, all of these align in a way that communicates real interest. When you ask a question because you have read that open-ended questions are a good communication technique and you are applying that knowledge, the performance quality often shows. The question lands more flatly. The conversation does not deepen in the way you hoped. So the foundation of great questioning is not the question itself. It is the genuine curiosity that generates the question. Cultivate real interest in the people you talk with. Be genuinely curious about their inner lives, their perspectives, their experiences. Ask because you want to know, not because you think asking makes you seem like a good communicator. Follow-up questions are where the real depth lives. The first answer a person gives is rarely their whole answer. It is the answer they could give quickly, the one that was most readily available, the one that is most socially acceptable or easiest to articulate. The follow-up question, asked with care and genuine interest, is the invitation to go deeper. Tell me more about that. What do you mean when you say that? How did that feel for you? Why do you think that is? Each of these questions says, I heard your first answer, and I want more. I am not satisfied with the surface. I believe there is something more valuable underneath, and I am willing to stay in this conversation long enough to reach it. There is an art to the follow-up question, and it requires that you have truly listened to the first answer. A follow-up question that does not connect organically to what the person just said signals that you are not listening. It breaks the thread. A follow-up question that flows naturally from the answer shows that you absorbed what they said and are genuinely building on it. This kind of questioning creates a feeling of being understood in real time, of being followed and accompanied through your own thoughts and feelings, and it is a profoundly connecting experience. Socratic questioning is a more structured form of open-ended questioning, named after the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, who famously claimed to know nothing and spent his life asking questions that helped others discover what they knew. The Socratic method is not about leading someone to a predetermined conclusion through clever questioning. It is about using questions to help someone examine their own assumptions, test their own reasoning, and arrive at a deeper and more accurate understanding of a situation. In everyday communication, you can use elements of this approach when you sense that someone is operating from an unexamined assumption or a mental model that is causing them problems. Rather than telling them they are wrong, you ask questions. What makes you say that? What would have to be true for that to work? Have you considered what happens if that assumption is not correct? These questions do not create defensiveness the way a direct challenge often does. Instead, they invite the other person to do their own examining, which is far more likely to produce genuine insight and change. Questions are also powerful tools for managing conversations that are heading in an unproductive direction. When a conversation becomes heated or stuck, a well-placed question can shift the energy entirely. Instead of responding to aggression with aggression, you ask a question. What is most important to you here? What outcome are you hoping for? What would it look like if this were resolved in a way that worked for both of us? These questions move the conversation from conflict to inquiry, from opposition to problem solving, from the past to the future. The art of asking great questions is ultimately the art of being genuinely interested in other people. It is a practice of humility because it acknowledges that you do not already know the answer. It is a practice of respect because it treats the other person as someone whose inner world is worth exploring. And it is a practice of courage because sometimes the answers to the best questions take you somewhere you did not expect, and you have to be willing to follow. Ask more. Assume less. The world that opens up when you do is worth every question. Tip 6. Manage your emotions. Do not suppress them. Every difficult conversation in the world, every argument that escalated beyond what it should have, every relationship that was damaged by words spoken in heat, every professional situation that went sideways because someone lost their composure, all of these share a common thread: emotions that were not managed effectively. Emotional management and communication is one of the most misunderstood concepts in the field. Many people interpret it to mean emotional suppression. Do not get angry, do not cry, do not let them see how you feel. Put on a neutral face and control your responses. But suppression is not management. Suppression is avoidance, and avoidance has costs. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They find their way out in sarcasm, in passive aggression, in sudden outbursts triggered by something small, in the slow accumulation of resentment that eventually corrodes even the most resilient relationships. Real emotional management means something much more sophisticated and more demanding. It means developing the capacity to be aware of your emotional state, to understand what is driving it, to express it in ways that are honest and appropriate, and to regulate its intensity so that it does not overwhelm your judgment or your ability to connect. The first step is awareness. You cannot manage something you are not aware of. And the truth is that many people move through their days with a very limited vocabulary for their own emotional experience. They know when they are happy or when they are angry. But the richer, more nuanced emotional landscape of being human, the anxiety that masquerades as irritation, the grief that looks like numbness, the fear that shows up as control, all of this often goes unnoticed and therefore unmanaged. Developing emotional awareness means learning to notice your inner states with more precision and more frequency. It means checking in with yourself during and before challenging conversations, asking not just whether you are okay, but what specifically you are feeling and where in your body you feel it. Research by neuroscientist Antonio Damasio and others has shown that emotions manifest physically before we consciously register them. The tightening in the chest before we recognize we are anxious. The heat in the face before we know we are angry. Learning to read these physical signals gives you earlier and more accurate access to your emotional state, which gives you more time and more options for how to respond. The second step is understanding. Once you are aware of what you are feeling, the next question is why. Not in a ruminating, self-critical way, but in a genuinely curious way. What is this emotion trying to tell me? What need is underneath it? What am I afraid of, or hoping for, or grieving? Emotions are not random. They are meaningful signals from your nervous system about how a situation relates to your values, your needs, your history, and your sense of self. When you understand the message your emotion is carrying, you are in a much better position to decide what to do with it. Anger, for example, is often a response to a perceived violation of a boundary, a value, or a sense of fairness. When you feel angry, rather than simply reacting from the anger, you can ask, what boundary do I feel has been crossed here? What value do I feel is being violated? And the answer to those questions will often tell you much more clearly than the raw anger itself what needs to be addressed and how. The third step is expression. Emotions need to be expressed. Healthy expression is not the same as unfiltered expression. You do not need to say every angry thought out loud, but you do need to acknowledge the emotion, to yourself and often to the other person, in a way that is honest and measured. This is where the distinction between I statements and you statements becomes critically important. A you statement puts the responsibility for your emotional state onto the other person. You made me feel angry. You are being unfair. You never listen. These statements immediately put the listener on the defensive, and a person who is defensive is not a person who can hear you well. They are too busy protecting themselves. An I statement takes ownership of your emotional experience while still communicating it clearly. I am feeling really frustrated right now because I felt like my contribution was dismissed. I felt hurt when the meeting ended without my input being acknowledged. I am struggling to stay calm because this feels really important to me and I am worried we are not taking it seriously enough. These statements are honest. They are direct. They communicate the emotional reality without attacking the other person. And because they do not put the listener on the defensive, they create the possibility of a real response rather than a reactive one. The fourth step is regulation. There are moments in every challenging conversation when the emotional intensity reaches a level where productive communication becomes impossible. When you are in the physiological state of fight or flight, when cortisol and adrenaline are flooding your system, when your heart rate has elevated significantly, the parts of your brain responsible for empathy, nuance, and sophisticated reasoning go offline. You are in survival mode, not communication mode. Recognizing this state in yourself and knowing how to down-regulate it is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. The simplest and most effective tool available to every human being in this situation is controlled breathing. Specifically, extending the exhale. A slow exhale of 5 to 7 seconds activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which counteracts the fight or flight response and begins to restore access to the higher brain functions you need for effective communication. Naming your own emotional state out loud in a conversation can also be remarkably regulating. Research by psychologist Matthew Lieberman and colleagues has shown that the act of labeling an emotion, putting a word to it, literally reduces the activation of the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system. When you say out loud, "I notice I am feeling quite upset right now," you are not just being transparent with the other person. You are physiologically calming your own nervous system. Taking a break is sometimes the most important and courageous thing you can do in the middle of a difficult conversation. There is no virtue in powering through an exchange when both parties are too flooded to be effective. A brief pause, even 10 minutes, long enough for both nervous systems to come down from high alert, can change the entire trajectory of a conversation. The key is to frame the break as a pause rather than a withdrawal. "I need a few minutes to collect myself so I can engage with this properly." That is not weakness. That is wisdom. Managing your emotions in communication is not about being calm all the time. It is not about hiding your humanity behind a professional mask. It is about being emotionally honest in ways that serve the conversation rather than derail it. The people who do this well are experienced as trustworthy, grounded, and safe. They are the people others turn to in difficult moments because they know that whatever happens, the conversation will not get out of control. Become that person. Tip 7. Embrace the power of silence. In a world that glorifies constant output, where every pause in conversation is an invitation to speak and every moment of quiet is an opportunity to fill, the idea that silence might be powerful can feel counterintuitive. We have been trained, consciously and unconsciously, to equate eloquence with volume and intelligence with the speed of verbal response. The person who speaks immediately and confidently is often perceived as having the answer. The person who pauses is often assumed to be uncertain, unprepared, or behind. This assumption is not only wrong, it is actively harmful to the quality of communication. Silence does not signal emptiness. Silence is not the absence of communication. Silence is its own kind of communication, and in many situations, it communicates more powerfully than words. The silence after a significant statement, the pause before a considered response, the quiet that follows a deep question. These are not dead air. They are space, and space is where thinking happens, where feelings surface, where understanding is actually processed and integrated. Consider what happens in a conversation when someone shares something vulnerable. They take a risk. They say something they have been holding for a long time, something that costs them something to say out loud. And then there is a moment. That moment is enormously important. If you fill it immediately with your own words, even with kind and well-intentioned words, you compress that moment, you squeeze the air out of it, and something is lost. The person who took the risk feels on some level that the weight of what they shared was not fully received, that the conversation moved on too quickly, that there was not quite enough room for what they said to breathe. But if you let that moment exist, if you allow the silence to hold what was shared, you give it space to be real. You say with your silence what words often cannot adequately express. "I heard that. What you just said matters. I am not rushing past it." Silence after a question is equally powerful. Most people wait approximately 1.5 seconds before jumping in to fill the silence after asking a question. This is not nearly long enough. Thoughtful answers to meaningful questions take time to formulate. When you ask someone a deep question and then rush to fill the silence before they have had the chance to genuinely reach for an honest answer, you have effectively asked a question that you do not actually want answered. The practice of extending your tolerance for silence after asking a question or after making a statement is one of the simplest and most immediately impactful things you can do for the quality of your conversations. Even extending your wait time from 1.5 seconds to 5 or 6 seconds will produce noticeably richer responses. And extending it further, when the situation calls for it, can open conversations to depths that would have been entirely inaccessible if you had rushed. Silence is also a powerful tool for emphasis. In speech, the spaces between words and sentences are as important as the words and sentences themselves. A well-placed pause before a key point signals to the listener that something important is coming. It creates anticipation. It draws attention. It says, "What comes next deserves your full focus." Many of the most compelling speakers and storytellers in the world use this technique masterfully, and you have almost certainly experienced it. The speaker who slows down and pauses before delivering the central truth of their message. The teacher who stops mid-sentence and lets the silence pull the class forward. The leader who pauses before speaking in a tense meeting, and in doing so, claims the room. There is also a category of silence that functions as a form of respectful challenge. When someone says something that you are not sure you agree with, or something that you think deserves more examination, a response of silence can communicate that you have heard them, but that the matter is not closed. It invites them to continue, to elaborate, to reconsider. It is far less confrontational than a direct challenge, and yet it creates the same opportunity for the thought to be examined more carefully. In negotiations and difficult conversations, silence is an extraordinarily powerful tool. When you have made an offer or stated a position, the instinct to immediately elaborate, to justify, to soften, to add conditions is almost overwhelming. Resist it. State what you have to say, and then let the silence work. The discomfort of silence in a negotiation or a tense conversation creates pressure, and more often than not, that pressure causes the other person to fill the silence in ways that reveal information, offer concessions, or move toward understanding. Learning to be comfortable with silence requires confronting the anxiety that silence often triggers. For many people, silence in conversation feels threatening. It can feel like rejection, like failure, like an indication that something is wrong. These feelings are worth examining. Where do they come from? What are you afraid will happen if the silence continues? Often, what we discover when we examine these feelings is that our discomfort with silence is rooted in something about our own sense of worthiness, our need to be entertaining or valuable or correct. Becoming comfortable with silence often means becoming more comfortable with yourself. Practice silence today. In your next conversation, when a question has been asked or an important thought has been shared, count silently to 5 before you respond. Notice what happens. Notice how much richer the exchange becomes when you give it room to breathe. The most meaningful conversations are not the loudest ones. Tip 8. Give feedback that builds rather than breaks. Every relationship, every team, every community depends on feedback to grow, improve, and stay aligned. Feedback is the mechanism by which we let each other know what is working, what is not, and what needs to change. It is essential. And yet most people either avoid giving it entirely because they are afraid of conflict or of hurting someone's feelings, or they give it in ways that damage the person rather than helping them. There is a way to give feedback that is honest, direct, and genuinely helpful. That does not erode trust, create resentment, or leave the recipient feeling attacked and diminished. That builds the relationship rather than straining it. And mastering this way of giving feedback is one of the most valuable communication investments you will ever make. Let us start with the most important principle. Feedback is most effective when it comes from a place of genuine care for the person receiving it. People can tell the difference between feedback that is offered to help them grow and feedback that is offered to punish, control, or diminish them. Even if the words are identical, the intent comes through. In your tone, in your expression, in the context you have built with that person over time. If someone trusts that you are on their side, they can receive feedback from you that would feel devastating coming from someone who does not have that trust. The foundation of effective feedback is relationship. The structure of the feedback matters enormously. One of the most widely used and genuinely useful frameworks for delivering feedback is sometimes called the situation, behavior, impact model. Rather than making general claims about a person's character or overall performance, you describe a specific situation, the specific observable behavior you want to address, and the impact that behavior had on you, on the team, or on the outcome. So instead of saying, "You are always dismissive in meetings," which is a character judgment that is almost impossible to respond to constructively without becoming defensive, you might say, "In yesterday's meeting, when Priya was presenting her proposal, you interrupted her 3 times before she had finished her point. I noticed she became quieter after the second interruption and did not complete what she was going to say. That is the impact on team dynamics I wanted to bring to your attention." This approach is specific, observable, and focused on behavior rather than character. It gives the person something concrete to work with. It is not an attack on who they are, but a description of what they did. And it makes clear what the actual problem is and why it matters, which is information the person needs in order to change. Timing is critical in feedback. Feedback is most useful when it is given as close to the relevant event as possible. Saving up a collection of grievances and delivering them all at once, which is sometimes called a feedback dump, is rarely productive. It overwhelms the recipient. It feels like an ambush, and it makes it very difficult to know what to focus on or prioritize. Feedback given in the moment, or shortly afterward, is more specific, more memorable, and more actionable. However, feedback given in the heat of the moment, when emotions are running high, is often more harmful than helpful. The guideline is to wait until the emotional intensity has subsided, which might mean waiting until the next day, but not so long that the specific incident is no longer fresh. Framing matters. How you introduce feedback shapes how it is received before the content of the feedback has even been delivered. Framing feedback as a conversation rather than a pronouncement, as something you want to work through together rather than something you are imposing on the other person, changes the dynamic entirely. Asking whether this is a good time to share some feedback is a small act of respect that significantly increases the likelihood of the feedback being heard. Expressing your positive intent, "I am bringing this up because I want us to work well together," or "because I think this is getting in the way of your goals," gives the person a frame through which to receive what follows. Specificity in feedback is everything. Vague feedback is not just unhelpful, it is actually harmful because it creates anxiety without giving the person any clear direction for change. Telling someone that they need to communicate better is not feedback. Telling someone that when they send emails without a clear subject line or action item, it takes 3 exchanges to accomplish what 1 exchange should, and asking if they would be willing to experiment with putting the specific request in the first line of the email, that is feedback. It is specific, behavioral, and actionable. Positive feedback, feedback that recognizes what someone is doing well, is as important and often more neglected than corrective feedback. Many people operate in environments where their mistakes are noted and their successes are assumed. They receive corrective feedback when they fall short and silence when they perform well. Over time, this creates a relationship between effort and anxiety, where the primary function of feedback is to tell you what is wrong. This is not a healthy communication environment, and it suppresses the very performance and creativity that both individuals and organizations depend on. Effective positive feedback is not vague praise. Well done and good job are not feedback. They are gestures of approval that feel nice, but communicate little of substance. Effective positive feedback is specific and describes exactly what the person did and why it was effective. The way you handled that customer complaint by first acknowledging their frustration before moving to a solution is exactly the kind of approach that turns a difficult interaction into a loyalty-building moment. That tells the person precisely what they did, why it mattered, and reinforces the behavior in a way that makes it more likely to be repeated. Receiving feedback, which is the other side of this exchange, is also a skill. Most people are not very good at it. The natural human response to being evaluated or corrected is a form of defensiveness, a tightening, a pulling away, an urge to explain or justify or reframe. This response is understandable. It comes from the part of us that wants to protect our sense of competence and worth, but it shuts down the very exchange that could help us grow. Becoming a great receiver of feedback requires developing the ability to separate the feedback from your identity. The feedback is about something you did, not about who you are. It is information, not judgment. And even if it is delivered imperfectly, even if the person giving it is not using ideal communication techniques, there is almost always something of value in it if you are willing to stay open enough to look for it. When you receive feedback, resist the urge to respond immediately. Take a breath. Say thank you for sharing that. Ask clarifying questions to make sure you understood what was being said. And then take time to reflect on it before deciding whether and how to act on it. You do not owe immediate agreement to every piece of feedback you receive, but you owe the person and yourself the genuine effort to hear it fully. A culture of great feedback, where people give it honestly, receive it openly, and use it constructively, is one of the most powerful forces available to any team, family, or community. Building that culture starts with each individual choosing to be the kind of person who gives and receives feedback with honesty, care, and skill. Tip 9. Communicate across difference. The world you communicate in is not a homogeneous place. The people you share your life with, whether at work, in your community, or in your personal relationships, bring with them a staggering diversity of backgrounds, cultures, values, communication styles, and ways of making meaning. What feels natural and obvious to you about how conversations should go, what courtesy looks like, how much directness is appropriate, when it is acceptable to express emotion, how decisions should be made. All of this is shaped by your particular cultural and personal history, and it is shaped differently for every person you encounter. Communicating well across difference is not about erasing those differences or finding some neutral middle ground where no one's style is honored. It is about developing the flexibility to recognize difference, to be curious about it rather than threatened by it, and to adapt your approach in ways that build connection rather than amplify distance. The first and most important thing to understand about cultural differences in communication is that they are real, deep, and often invisible until they create a problem. Cultures differ enormously on dimensions like directness versus indirectness, individualism versus collectivism, high context versus low context communication, different attitudes toward hierarchy and authority, different norms around emotional expression, and different relationships between talk and silence. A high context culture is one where a great deal of meaning is communicated through context, relationship, tone, and implication, rather than through explicit verbal statement. In many East Asian cultures, for example, a direct refusal is considered rude or face-threatening, and a polite indirect response that signals reluctance without explicitly saying no is understood by members of that culture as a refusal. Someone from a low-context culture, such as many Northern European or North American cultures, where meaning is expected to be stated explicitly, may walk away from that exchange entirely missing the refusal, having heard ambiguity where clarity was actually being communicated. These kinds of mismatches create enormous amounts of confusion and conflict, not because either party is communicating poorly within their own cultural framework, but because neither party recognizes that they are operating in different frameworks. Developing cultural intelligence, the ability to recognize and adapt to cultural differences in communication, begins with acknowledging that your own way of communicating is not the universal default. It is one of many valid ways, shaped by a particular cultural history, and it will not translate perfectly into every context. This requires a form of epistemic humility that can be genuinely challenging for people who have never had to navigate outside their own cultural bubble. But the rewards of developing this flexibility are enormous. People who communicate well across cultural differences are more effective leaders, more valued collaborators, more connected in their personal lives, and more capable of navigating the complex, diverse world we all inhabit. They are the people who can build bridges where others see barriers, who can find common ground in the most seemingly divergent conversations. Individual differences in communication style are just as significant as cultural ones. People differ on introversion and extroversion, on how they process information, on their emotional sensitivity and expressiveness, on their relationship with conflict, on how much context they need before they can engage with a specific point, and on dozens of other dimensions that shape how they experience any given conversation. Some people need to think out loud. They process information by talking through it, and their spoken thoughts are not necessarily their final position. Others need to think quietly before they speak. They need time to process internally before they are ready to engage externally. In a conversation between these two types, the external processor may experience the internal processor as withholding or disengaged, while the internal processor may experience the external processor as overwhelming or impulsive. Neither perception is accurate, but without awareness of the underlying difference, both can become sources of real friction and misunderstanding. Generational differences in communication style are increasingly significant in workplaces and families. Different generations have grown up with different technologies, different social norms, and different expectations about how communication should work. What feels like an appropriate level of formality in a professional email to someone who entered the workforce in the early 1980s may feel strangely cold or hierarchical to someone who entered it in the 2010s. What feels like appropriate directness to a younger communicator may feel disrespectful to an older one. What feels like a perfectly natural emoji in a message to one person may feel entirely unprofessional to another. Navigating these differences requires ongoing attention and genuine effort. It requires asking rather than assuming, checking in rather than extrapolating, being willing to adjust rather than insisting that your way is simply right. Gender and identity also shape communication in ways that are real and worth understanding, while being careful not to reduce individuals to generalizations. Research has consistently found broad patterns in how people socialized as men and women tend to approach conversation, though the variation within genders is always greater than the variation between them. Some of these patterns relate to the purpose of conversation itself. Many studies have found that women tend to use conversation more frequently as a means of building and maintaining connection, while men tend more frequently to use conversation as a means of exchanging information or establishing status. When these different orientations meet in the same conversation, each party can come away feeling unsatisfied without being able to fully articulate why. The key principle across all forms of difference is genuine curiosity and a genuine willingness to adapt. When you encounter a communication style that is unfamiliar or uncomfortable, resist the urge to judge it as wrong and instead ask, what is this person's communication culture? What are they trying to accomplish? How can I meet them where they are? This requires flexibility, patience, and a secure enough sense of your own identity that you can adjust your style without feeling that you are losing yourself. The goal of communicating across difference is not to become someone else. It is to expand your repertoire, to become a communicator who can move between styles with ease and intentionality, who can honor and adapt to difference while remaining fully and authentically yourself. That is a genuinely rare and beautiful skill, and it is available to anyone willing to practice it. Tip 10. Be honest with compassion. Honesty is not a simple thing. We all know, in principle, that honesty is a virtue, that it is the foundation of trust, that relationships built on it are more durable and more real than those that are not. And yet in practice, honesty is often the first thing we sacrifice when the stakes feel high or the potential for discomfort is present. We soften, we omit, we redirect, we tell partial truths that create misleading impressions. We give compliments we do not mean. We keep silent when speaking would serve the other person far better than our silence. And we justify all of this to ourselves as kindness. But there is a kind of dishonesty that masquerades as kindness and is actually a form of cowardice. It is the choice to protect yourself from discomfort by protecting the other person from truth, and it costs far more than it saves. This does not mean that brutal honesty, the kind that is delivered without regard for timing or tone or the other person's capacity to receive it, is the ideal. Brutal honesty is just brutality with a disclaimer. The goal is something more sophisticated and more demanding than either dishonesty or brutality. The goal is honest communication delivered with genuine compassion. Compassionate honesty is possible. It is the way that a great doctor delivers a difficult diagnosis, not hedging or minimizing the truth, but holding the patient with warmth and care while delivering it. It is the way a genuinely caring friend tells you something you need to hear but did not ask to hear. Not cruelly, not gleefully, but with love and with the clear intention of your well-being. It is the way that truly great leaders give their teams honest assessments of difficult realities, honoring the truth while also honoring the people who need to hear it. The first element of compassionate honesty is timing. Not every truth needs to be told at every moment. Some truths need to wait for the conditions that will allow them to land well. If someone has just experienced a loss and you have critical feedback for them, this is not the moment. If someone is in the middle of a public performance and you have noticed a problem, interrupting them is not honesty. It is a failure of timing. The truth you have to share is still worth sharing, but its value depends in part on when and how you share it. The second element is context. Before delivering a difficult truth, it helps to establish the context of your care. Not as a strategy, not to soften the blow so that you can get away with saying something harsh, but as a genuine expression of where you are coming from. When someone understands that the hard thing you are about to say comes from a place of respect and care, they can receive it very differently than if they experience it as an ambush or an attack. The third element is the truth itself. This needs to be clear and direct. The compassionate part of compassionate honesty is in the delivery, not in the dilution of the content. Softening a truth until it can no longer be recognized is not kindness. It is a failure to actually communicate, and it leaves the other person without the information they need. If a colleague's presentation has a significant structural flaw that is going to undermine their credibility, telling them it was really interesting and maybe they might consider looking at the structure a little bit is not helpful. Telling them clearly that you think the structure does not yet support the argument you know they are trying to make, and that you want to help them fix it before they deliver it to a broader audience is helpful. The content is honest. The delivery is kind. Both are necessary. The fourth element is receptivity, which means creating space after delivering a difficult truth for the other person to respond. Honesty is not a one-way transmission. It is a conversation. After you have shared something difficult, you want to know how it landed. You want to understand whether they heard what you intended or whether your message was received differently. You want to be willing to discuss, to clarify, to amend, and where appropriate, to be changed by their response. Honesty in conversation is not about having the last word. It is about creating the conditions for genuine understanding. White lies are worth examining carefully because our culture treats them as a harmless social lubricant, and in small doses in casual social situations, they probably are. But the habit of telling white lies can, over time, erode both your own sense of integrity and other people's ability to trust what you say. When you train yourself to say you are fine when you are not, to say the dinner was wonderful when it was mediocre, to say you will think about it when you have already decided against it, you are practicing a form of low-level dishonesty that can bleed into more significant moments. And you are training the people around you not to take your responses at face value. An alternative to white lies is a gentler version of the truth. Instead of lying, you can choose to be honest at a level of detail that is appropriate for the relationship and the context. You do not have to tell every person who asks how you are that you are struggling with anxiety and your sleep has been terrible. But you also do not have to say you are wonderful. You could say, honestly, it has been a challenging week. Or you could say, getting through it, thanks for asking. These are honest responses that do not demand more intimacy than the relationship warrants. The courage to be honest, especially when honesty is uncomfortable, is one of the most profound forms of respect you can show another person. It says, I believe you are capable of handling the truth. I believe you deserve the truth. And I care enough about you to give it to you, even at some cost to my own comfort. That is a gift. Give it freely and give it well. Tip 11. Keep growing as a communicator. Everything you have read so far in this book is not a destination. It is a beginning. The 10 principles you have encountered: listening to understand, speaking with clarity, reading and expressing through your body, building empathy, asking opening questions, managing your emotions, embracing silence, giving building feedback, communicating across difference, and being honestly compassionate. These are not skills you master once and then possess forever. They are practices, living practices. And like all living things, they grow when they are tended and they atrophy when they are not. This final tip is about something that underlies and sustains all of the others. It is about cultivating a deep and ongoing commitment to becoming a better communicator throughout your life. It is about understanding that this journey does not have an end point, that there is always more to learn, more to practice, more to understand about the infinitely complex and endlessly fascinating business of human connection. The first thing to understand about growth as a communicator is that it requires feedback. And the most important feedback you can get is not from a book or a course or an expert. It is from the people you communicate with every day. The people in your life are constantly giving you feedback on how your communication is landing. Most of that feedback is not verbal. It is in how they respond to you, how much they confide in you, whether they seek you out or avoid you, whether they lean in when you speak or pull back, Whether conversations with you tend to leave people energized or drained. Learning to read this feedback, to stay open to it rather than defensive against it, is one of the most important practices available to any communicator. You can also actively invite feedback. This requires courage. Asking someone you trust, "What is one thing I could do differently in our conversations that would make them feel better for you?" is not a comfortable question. But the answers it generates are often extraordinary. People who are asked this question with genuine openness tend to give extraordinarily useful answers, because they have often been sitting on the information for a long time, not knowing if it was safe or welcome to share it. Self-observation is another powerful tool for growth. After significant conversations, take a few minutes to reflect. Not to replay the conversation for things you should have said differently in a self-critical way, but to genuinely inquire. What went well? What did you notice about your own listening, your own emotional state, your own use of questions and silence? Where did you feel most present and effective, and where did you feel yourself slipping into old habits? This kind of reflective practice, over time, creates a very detailed and accurate map of your own communication landscape, including the territories where you are strong and the ones where you have the most to gain from continued growth. Reading widely and learning continuously is part of the journey. The field of human communication draws on psychology, neuroscience, linguistics, anthropology, philosophy, theater, and a dozen other disciplines. There is an inexhaustible amount to learn, and the learning is endlessly interesting because it is always ultimately learning about what it means to be human. The books you read, the courses you take, the conversations you have about communication itself, all of these feed the practice and enrich your understanding. Perhaps the most important element of ongoing growth as a communicator is humility. The willingness to acknowledge that you do not have it all figured out, that you still make mistakes, that there are conversations you handle badly and relationships where you fall short of the communicator you want to be. This humility is not weakness. It is the very quality that keeps the door to growth open. The communicator who believes they have arrived stops improving. The communicator who remains genuinely curious, genuinely humble, genuinely committed to the ongoing work of connection, continues to grow. There is a concept in Japanese culture called kaizen, which translates roughly as continuous improvement. It describes the practice of making small, consistent improvements over time rather than waiting for dramatic transformations. Applied to communication, this means not trying to overhaul everything about the way you communicate all at once, which is overwhelming and rarely sustainable, but instead choosing one principle at a time to work with, practicing it deliberately, noticing its effects, and then gradually building on it with the next. Choose one of the 11 tips from this book to begin with. The one that resonates most strongly, or perhaps the one that challenges you most. Practice it for 1 week with genuine intention and awareness. Bring it into every significant conversation you have. Notice what shifts. Notice what is difficult. Notice what surprises you. And at the end of the week, reflect on what you learned, not about the principle in the abstract, but about yourself as a communicator engaging with it in the real complexity of your actual life and relationships. Then move to the next tip. And the next. Not in a rigid, programmatic way, but with the fluid, responsive spirit of someone who is genuinely interested in the process of becoming, who understands that growth is not a line from where you are to where you want to be, but a spiraling, living journey that deepens and enriches everything it touches. Your voice matters. Not just the voice that emerges from your throat, but the fuller voice of your complete presence in conversation. Your listening, your curiosity, your honesty, your empathy, your willingness to be changed by what you hear. That voice, in its fullest expression, is a gift to every person who has the privilege of encountering it. And developing that voice is one of the most worthwhile things you will ever do. A final word. We began with the observation that we live in a world more connected than ever before, and yet more disconnected in the ways that matter most. We have explored, across 11 principles, what it actually takes to bridge that gap. Not to send more messages, but to connect more deeply. Not to speak more, but to be heard more fully. Not to win more arguments, but to create more genuine understanding. The work of becoming a great communicator is ultimately the work of becoming more fully human. It is the work of slowing down enough to truly be present with other people, of having the courage to be honest, of developing the emotional intelligence to feel deeply without being overwhelmed, of asking better questions and then having the patience to genuinely receive the answers, of adapting and growing and remaining curious, not just about the people around you, but about the endlessly rich and complex experience of being alive together. None of this is easy. All of it is worth it. The 11th tip is the one that never ends. Keep growing. Keep practicing. Keep showing up to the beautiful, demanding, indispensable work of connecting with other human beings. The world is changed, conversation by conversation, by the quality of attention we bring to each other. Bring yours fully. Begin today.